Okay, guys, so I haven't made a video in a while. So today we are going to make a tier list on all the Pathfinder classes. Um, Now, you might be like, hey, what kind of, we're rating this on? And it's kind of like the atypical, like, what class can, you know, has multiple ways to deal with encounters, or has the most ways, and it's like the most versatile, and if played correctly, is just the most effective in the game. And then we kind of get progressively less so towards the bottom of the list. It gets kind of more into you get more into like who does one thing really really well in a lot of cases, or maybe even just a couple things like better than the other ones, and then you get down to the single ones who do things really well, and then at the bottom you kind of have the classes who just they don't even do one thing particularly well. um, that's essentially basically what the list is going to be. That's mostly it. I'm also going to be making a new Discord here pretty quick because my link is apparently broken, but I also want to make a new Discord we where I'm going to be kind of putting together some good resources for like people who are new to like DMing or just playing or looking to build characters and play characters and stuff like that for first edition. So this is a tier list on Pathfinder first edition. Let's get right to it. I'm actually going to pick the really easy one to start with, just so I kind of have a good bearing in my mind, because I am probably going to be very flip floppy on a couple of these, and I'll probably have to rearrange a little bit later on. I don't have like everything firmly set in my head, but there's definitely some classes where I'm like, hey, this is definitely where I would place this. So Arcanist is a pretty easy one. It is without a doubt the best class in the game. In terms of versatility and effectiveness, it's basically a wizard and a sorcerer put together that has like some Magus, Arcanas, and some other things that are even better than that. It's honestly the only real con of this class is its spell progression is one level slower than wizard, but the exploits make up for that quite well, and the fact that they're a spells done class with more casts and stuff like that just makes them really really good. I this is definitely a really good one. It is a little bit more complicated, but it is very good. Basically, every day on like a sorcerer, they change their spells like known every day, like a wizard kind of does, but they have like a lot of casts, so it's very strong. Um, okay, so if we're gonna go for like kind of some sun bottom ones here, so plain old rogue. I want to be clear. This is plain old rogue. This is an F tier. Plain old rogue just doesn't do a lot. They can do traps and they get sneak attack and a couple other tiny little things. They're just not very good. There's classes that do what they do, but much better. Uh, they honestly can't even fulfill their own role very well. Like you can play a Slayer or a Ranger and be a better trap finder and bring much more to the party. Is a very rough class. It's very sad, but that is just kind of the truth of it. Okay, let's bring in another one here. So we'll just roll in the Alchemist here. I might not be 100% on this one, but I feel like Alchemist is probably gonna rest either in B or C. I might move this later. Um, Very solid class. I'm gonna probably go with C though. And just want to be clear, this doesn't mean that any of these classes are bad necessarily because they're in a tier. Like if you build and play a character correctly, you can still be way beyond this. It's just that if you do it with one of these other higher classes, you're gonna probably get more of your mileage. But I've seen people who can build like fucking rogues or whatever who just absolutely curb stomp compared to the rest of the party, just because some people don't know how to necessarily play, or they just find one really good way to do it. Some classes also have archetypes that put them significantly more ahead or whatever than where I'd rank their core class. I want to be clear as well. I'm only going to be taking that a little bit into the factor, but if you want to talk about archetypes, I'll make tier lists on those later, and we'll like make some archetype or yeah like tier breakers. I guess I would call them essentially, where they're so good that they break that class to a higher tier essentially. Something like that would be, for example, would be like an Eldritch Scoundrel and for Unchained Rogue that would bring it up. But we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But Alchemist is pretty good. I get 6th level extracts. It doesn't have like a super amazing list, but it has a lot going on for it with bombs and extracts and mutagens. Some very some solid archetypes in there as well. Pretty good class. I think that this thing kind of does everything pretty well. You kind of can really only build to do like one or two things though, and I don't think that it really competes with some of the other things that I'd put in B tier, or that I will be putting in B tier. But it's still very good. There's nothing wrong with this class. Like I said, like nothing on this list is necessarily wrong. There's just they're not as good as the rest in some cases when you build them up properly. Okay. Antipaladin. So this is kind of a tough one. I'm probably gonna lean D tier for this. I don't think that this thing makes it into the 6th level caster area. It's pretty close. To being like kind of good. Like paladins have a lot going on for them in this edition, and I don't think that they're quite there. In terms of that, like they have like their smites and their attacks, and lay on hands, or in this case the negative version of that. They're definitely solid, and they have some pretty cool spells. But I don't think that they make it up to this next tier, sadly. They definitely can still be quite big monsters later on for sure. But yeah, like I said, I don't think they're there. Barbarian. I don't. Barbarian's not bad. I don't really think that it's like this crazy huge monster particularly, but they're pretty good. You can honestly make a case to maybe shove them into D tier, but I don't think that they're quite there. They're pretty good though. Bard. I think this is a firm C tier. They kind of have a lot of similar things to Alchemist, really, where they can do a lot of roles, and they can do them pretty well. They have a decent spell list and some interesting stuff like that. Really good buffs, interesting archetypes that can definitely put them into pretty cool spots. But ultimately, I'd say that they're definitely C tier. Their spell list just isn't like enough to really for me to push them into B. But they can fulfill a lot of they're a very good support class, and they can fulfill a lot of roles. I think they're pretty solid. Like I said, I put it C because the spell list just isn't great, and they don't really. They have a good skill selection for sure, which is definitely really awesome. They can kind of fulfill like 2 roles pretty well or whatever in some cases. You might be able to squeeze a little bit more mileage out of them, but I put them in a firm C tier. I feel pretty good about that. Blood Rager. Okay. So this is kind of a tough one because I feel like Blood Rager has a lot going on for it with its bloodlines, blood rages, and like a couple other things kind of going on for it. It's just a really good class. I mean, I kind of wish that the Blood Rage, auto spell thing was a little sooner than 10 or whatever it is, but it's a very strong class, and with like essentially like full wizard spells like 1 through 4. I feel like this gives it an edge. So like I would either put this thing on the very high end of D tier, or honestly, I'd maybe even put on the low end of C. And I think that's a really tough one. I'm kind of leaning to the low end of C, though. I think it's really, really good. Okay. Brawler. Okay, so Brawler's actually pretty good. Like it's not up here, but I think that this is like probably one of the best martial classes in the game. If feats were more powerful, I think in Pathfinder, you could definitely make a case for it hitting C. And I think some archetypes, there are some builds that definitely can kind of scoot their way into here if we done properly. But I think realistically, we're going to put this into D tier. But I think it's actually quite powerful, and when they're built properly, they can be quite strong. Okay, Cavalier. That's kind of a tough one. I don't think they're great though, to be honest. I would personally put them in probably E or F. I'm kind of leaning E, but they're probably in the lower end of it. I don't think there's a lot of things in this tier, to be honest, but there is definitely a few. This is definitely not great though. Like they're basically worse fighters that have like an sort of an iffy animal companion. Can be good, but I just don't think that they're great. But I would say that they're better than their counterpart, the samurai. I mean, samurai are cool as fuck, but these guys just they do a little bit more, and I think that they're not terrible, but they're not amazing. Cleric, well, Cleric's pretty mega. I'm gonna be honest. I definitely think that you're sitting around S tier. Arcanist is definitely supreme. You could maybe make a case to scoot it down here, but I think it's fine at S. I think it's really good. Best divine spell list in the game. Domains are really strong, really good, like hit points and saves, channels and heals. Like it's a definitive healing class with a lot of good spells, a lot of cool archetypes. It's just all around very solid. Druid. Okay, this is a tough one because Druid's pretty good. And it's definitely going to go in S tier, but I don't know if I want to put it ahead or behind Cleric. Now, if this was 3.5, I would actually say Druid's probably like the best fucking class in the game. Pathfinder definitely reined it in a little bit for sure with the wild shaping, but I don't know if I put it behind Cleric or ahead. I think personally it's behind though. I don't think that it has as good of a spell list. The transforming thing is definitely strong. It's kind of a tough one. I feel like Cleric kind of has. I mean, they're both pretty close because the wild shape gives it a lot of answers. I honestly, I could see this flipping, pretty easily for sure. But I think I'm gonna lock Cleric in as just a smidge bit better. But I think that they're nearly neck and neck, and I think honestly on a different day I could see these swapped around. Fighter. Honestly, Fighter's pretty good. Well, base Fighter's kind of like but Fighter has so many really good archetypes that it's really tough for me here. I'll be honest though, like I should probably put it down like here, but I think I'd put it like around here-ish. But Fighter has a lot of archetype breakers that I think could very easily put it up here. That like put it in the league with Brawler and Antipaladin stuff. But I'm not gonna get quite into that. If I'm ranking just like the core class, kind of this is where I'd put it. But if we're talking archetypes, I think it has some really good archetypes that can put it up higher and interesting builds. But as a whole, it definitely belongs in this tier. I don't know if it's necessarily behind Barbarian though. I might change that later, but we'll think about that. Gunslinger. Honestly, this is kind of funny. Like gunslingers are kind of overwhelming early on in some cases, but they kind of suck later, and they are really good at blowing up like one person, kind of like one monster essentially really hard, but they kind of only do one thing fairly well, and I kind of feel like archers do a better job later on. Personally, I think, um, mostly because like their entire class is made to make firearms work better, because firearms have kind of a lot of these little issues. I mean, yes, they have touch. They go off of touch if you're in the first range increment, but honestly, like they don't do next to damage till quite a ways later on in the game, and they have a lot of real janky things like with reloading and stuff, and possibly breaking. I don't know. I don't think that they're great. I actually honestly think that they're firmly in this E tier, and I would put them like here. I they do one thing fairly well, but I think that it gets outperformed. Like I'd rather have a fighter archer, I think, over a gunslinger late game. Early game, I think that this is better, but late game, I don't think it is. Well, I think that this just does more stuff better. Like this is really good against like one big ass monster later in the game, and it will probably outdo the fighter in that regard. But the fighter won't be that far behind, and they'll have a lot of other stuff going for them. So I'd rather take that. Hunter. Okay. Hunter is pretty good. 6th level spells, diffusion of ranger and druid. Reasonably solid base attack and saves and stuff, and skills. It's an all around pretty solid class, and it has an animal companion. It's pretty good. It's kind of like knock ranger down to having a full animal companion and more support for it, buff up its spells, and give it druid spells going to 6th level. That's a tough one to rank, I'd say, in my head right away. But I kind of feel I don't know. I kind of feel like it's probably in the C tier, but you could probably make a solid argument for it to be higher. I don't know if I put it higher than Alchemist and Bard. It's definitely higher than Blood Ranger. I might move this around, but I think it's definitely solidly in C tier. There might be some things that could make it higher, but I don't know. This class hasn't really impressed me a lot. Animal companions are definitely not bad, but I feel like the Bard just has more answers to things. Same with the Alchemist. The Hunter's not bad, but it kind of just does like one maybe two things like kind of well. And I think there's other classes that do it better. I think it's just kind of a more versatile ranger, I guess. All right, Inquisitor. Okay, this is a tough one. So once again, I've said that a lot. Inquisitor's kind of weird because like it has a really nice spell list for sure. The base class is like good, but like awkwardly, it's a class where like you're better off taking a lot of its archetypes because there's like two or three archetypes that are just like way better. Well, not just way better; they're just better, and they don't like crazily change how you play the class. I mean, one or two of them do. And it definitely has some, and this one definitely has an archetype breaker for sure. But I definitely feel like between the spell list and just the sheer versatility of Inquisitor, I feel like it's probably low on the B side. I don't know. I mean, it's probably high on C. I'd say. I think that you could make a case for B, but I think that its other archetypes are what push it into this. The base class itself is like good, but also kind of weird. Okay, Investigator. Okay, so this is kind of like an Alchemist Rogue. They're really good at skills. Really good at skills. Like they do skills better than any other class in the game. Like no way around arguing that. Combat, they can be okay if they have the right supplement and setup for it, but they have a lot of things that can kind of fuck them over. I can't really rank these guys crazy high. I'd honestly probably put Investigator around here. I love this class, but it's got some issues for sure, but it's still really good. It's just that it can do like two things really well, like skills really well, and it's like pretty good at combat if you get the right stuff going on for it. Well, not even pretty good. It's like good, but like honestly, you take an Investigator, it's not going to beat a Blood Rager in a straight up fight without like a lot of buffs. And even then, I'll still probably lose. But I don't skill the shit of this guy. Like this guy does like one. Well, he does like one thing pretty well, and he has spells that kind of like help make him a little bit better. Investigator has the same thing as like Alchemist, essentially. It's pretty good, but once again, I don't think it beats any of these other classes ahead of it. Magus. Okay, Magus is pretty good actually. I actually think this class is like really good. It's got a lot of core stuff in it that makes it really do really well. But I mean, it is basically a giant combat monster with not a lot of utility spells. But there's definitely a fair few ways to play it. I mean, but you kind of generally build them to do like one thing really well is the issue. But they do have but they do that one thing extraordinarily well. Skills not so hot at, but they are they have decent physical prowess and magic spells that give them decent coverage in different ways to do encounters. So I'm not sure where I'd exactly rank them, but I probably am kind of leaning like right. What's not where Bard is? Yeah, I'd say right around here. I just don't feel like they have as many ways to deal with encounters as these other guys do. Basically, I do think that there's archetypes that can make this better in certain builds for sure, but I think a decently played, a very well played Bard can potentially do more for a group than I feel like a really well played Magus. It's pretty close though. Alchemist for sure, and Inquisitor, depending on builds and etc. Untitled Monk. Okay, Untitled Monk kind of sucks. I'm gonna be honest, guys. I'm really not a fan of this thing. Like Unchained is just better. It's the same issue with Rogue. It doesn't do enough. I mean, it's definitely better than base Rogue. Like base Rogue's definitely bottom tier, but this is a problem thing. Unchained, like basically, there's never a reason to really play this unless you need to like dip into some archetype that Unchained can't get into. That's really it. Okay, Ninja. Okay, so Ninja's kind of sorry there, choking a little bit with a dry mouth. Ninja's not bad. I would say that it's definitely better than Rogue, but I don't think it's better than Unchained Rogue. I think that it does its job reasonably well. I would probably put it like right there. It's got I don't know. You could maybe make an argument for it to go higher, honestly, because it's definitely got some utility and stuff. I think it does. I think it does a decent job, though. Ultimately, I think it's an E tier class. You might be able to make an argument for it to be higher than these guys, and because barbarians have some pretty cool totems and shit that make them pretty rough to deal with. But they don't really have a lot of multiple ways to deal with things, but they do kill very well. I'm gonna say probably like that because fighters can definitely do probably more. I'd say, and yeah, actually, I feel pretty good about putting this down probably about like that. Just a little area range there. Okay, Umdura, or however you spell this. Yeah, I've never actually played this, but I have taken a look at it, and it's kind of a weird fusion of like Inquisitor and Paladin. But it does like a lot of group like judgment essentially, which is really nuts. And War Priest I think too. Like it was a really awkward fusion. I think it's actually pretty good though, and it has a good spell list. This is I think it's a little nutty. It doesn't have like a crazy like hey my super end game stuff progresses because it doesn't really quite progress on the same level that like all those other classes I named kind of go at the end of the day. Like it doesn't specialize particularly, but the fact that it has like group judgments essentially is kind of nuts, and eventually it gets like a full smite as a half smite essentially at lower levels. It gets like half the bonuses that Paladins do, but still really good. I I honestly would say that this is honestly probably in B tier, but probably like on the lower end of it. Unless there's something that I'm really missing that like there's a big drawback. I've never actually played this thing, but based on what I've seen of its class, it's pretty fucking strong. I'd say it could you could make a case for high C tier though. I think too, but I think it's better than Inquisitor. Okay, Oracle. Oracle's pretty good. It's basically just a cleric with spontaneous casting, so you can't change your spells. And slightly slower spell progression. I think it's great though. I think it's definitely very solid. I think this is definitely an A tier. It just doesn't have the same versatility that these guys do because they can't change its spells. That's honestly really its only downside. Paladin, it's basically the same as Antipaladin. I don't know. I'd say a little bit better because it smites evil and stuff, and it's just more relevant. But same idea and shenanigans. Very solid. Um, I put it in the same spot basically. Anti-Paladin's a little bit lower in my eyes just because a lot of campaigns aren't like made for them. Like you're not usually going around killing good people and etc. or getting to do it quite as freely and stuff. So it's a bit of a tough one. So I'd knock it down just a smidge. They do have some different spells too, but I think they're both pretty close. Ranger. Okay, so I actually really like Ranger, but it's not great. It's really not great. The switch hitter is probably the best variation of Ranger I've seen, where they do two handed and archery really well, and I think they do that setup better than basically any class. But I don't think that it's enough to really knock them into a crazy great spot, and they don't really have any archetypes that make them. They don't have like an archetype breaker that makes me feel like they would make me feel comfortable putting them higher or a crazy build. I don't like they just don't feel great to me. Like I they do have like an animal companion and some spells. Like I feel like you could put them like here. I don't even think that they're better than fighter to be honest. It's really tough because their animal companions behind. Their spells are like okay. They're definitely helpful, but favorite enemy is so circumstantial. Like if you get favorite enemy, this is a great class, and honestly, I'd say it beats fighter in damage if it gets that bonus, but if you don't, like, it's just kind of a dead thing, and it's not great. They have a great skill list though, so that's nice. But yeah, like I said, they just don't have enough going for them. I feel like personally, and the whole classic two-up fighting thing is really awkward. Like I said, I wouldn't do it. Two-up fighting is really kind of not great in this game unless you're like a rogue or something. But yeah, I'd say that they're behind fighter honestly. Um, yeah, I can't think of anything that makes them particularly better or have they fighter just does what they do but better. I probably played Rangers pretty close. Like I don't think it's like way better, but fighters just have so much like stuff that just makes them really good at that one thing. Whereas Rangers really don't have any. They have skills, so it kind of makes them a little bit better in some regard. But I think this is pretty close. It's kind of like you trade doing that one thing like exceptionally well, and you downgrade it like a step, but you have a little, but you upgrade your other one other little thing like up a little step. It's kind of tough. I think they're both solid, but I put Ranger here. Samurai is pretty bad. I'm gonna straight up say it. I think it's probably the king of F tier. It might be slower than might be a little bit behind Monk maybe, but this is basically just a worse Cavalier. I don't think it's great. It's basically just kind of a yeah. It's just the worst Cavalier. It has a banner instead of an animal companion. Not a great trait in my mind, and the archetypes for it don't make me feel great. I don't know. Maybe if there's some badass samurai build out there that would maybe make me put it up here, maybe. But I don't think they really have an archetype breaker particularly, so I'm fine with this. I think the only thing you could really argue with me on this is maybe putting it behind Monk. At least in my eyes, anyway. Shaman. Okay, Shaman's pretty fucking good, honestly. It's a fusion of Witch and Oracle. Uh, and it's got like kind of like its own variation of hexes and stuff. I think it's really good. It's also got some really cool shit with Arcane and Enlightenment or whatever it is, where you can steal things from other spellcast lists. This is where it's tough because I'd either put it like really high on A or I'd put it like over here. I don't know if I put it here or not though. I kind of feel like it's probably like a high A. It's really good though. It's really good. Like I'm really kind of torn on putting it into S. B's looking really lonely right now. I won't lie, but we got some stuff to put in there. Don't worry. Excuse me. All right, so next one here, Shifter. All right, so Shifter's kind of awkward, honestly. I think it's kind of bad. it got a little bit better in the Erida, and I think there's some stuff you can do with it. I don't think it's Samurai bad, but it's pretty bad. Like, it's a Wild Shape based class that doesn't really do good at Wild Shape. Like, Druid outclasses this thing. Arguably, there's Hunter archetypes that outclass this thing. I just don't think it's great. It has some like potential usefulness and some interesting stuff you can do with it, but I don't know. I just don't think it does this thing very well. I think it's like better than Cavalier, but like I don't know. Maybe even that's probably being generous, honestly. All right, Scald. I'll be honest. I think like so. Scald is well. Sorry. I guess let's explain what Scald is. So Scald is a barbarian bard combination class. It's pretty solid. You get a little less skill points, but you get some more barbarian stuff. Your song essentially increases strength and con, which is pretty damn good, honestly. And you can stack them with like a bard, and you can do some pretty scary stuff as a group. I think it's pretty good, but also one of their other awesome abilities is that they give rage powers when they do songs, which is really nuts, and also they get spell canning, which lets them mimic spells off other lists, which is crazy. Of the same level. So, they can't never mimic like a 7th level, but still, that gives them a lot of versatility. I think it's a really good class. I think that this class kind of actually beats Bard, though Bard has some archetypes that say that put them up there. Honestly, I put them higher than. I don't know if I put them higher than this or not, just because I haven't seen it in action. But I think Scout's really good. I think it's a really good 6th level caster, and it can do spell casting. It can do melee fighting very well. It buffs the party really well. You can sub into some weird roles with spell canning. Skills aren't bad. I don't know. I think this class just does a lot of stuff quite well. Alright, so Slayer. I also really like Slayer. Slayer is a combination of like a... It's kind of weird. It's supposed to be like a fighter rogue, but it kind of turns into like more like a ranger rogue. It's really weird. Or I think maybe it's supposed to be like a ranger rogue, but I don't know. It just feels really weird to me. It's definitely not bad. I think this is actually pretty good. I think it's better than ranger. I would actually place it like right here. It has really good skill points, base attack and reflex for saves, decent hit points. The talents in it are pretty solid. It gets a sneak attack progression. And the big thing is steady target is really solid and it scales. It scales at half the rate that favorite enemy does, but it always works because, well, the favorite enemy needs a favorite enemy. Steady target is I look at that man, I know how to kill him. It's way better. Yes, Ranger will outperform it if it gets his favorite enemies consistently in a campaign, but that's really, really unlikely. Like, I think Slayer is just better. Archetype wise, I can't think of anything that really makes me excited when it comes to archetypes, though, but I'd have to really go through it. It's definitely not bad, though. Definitely not bad. Sorcerer. Okay, so this is another A tier in my eyes. Honestly, you could flip Oracle and Sorcerer around. They're interchangeable in my mind. Both very solid. Basically the same issue as Oracle for Cleric. They're spontaneous, and they just don't have quite as much versatility in answers. They can't change their list. Okay, so Summoner. Summoner's pretty good. Eidolons are nuts. So Eidolons are like essentially like another fucking character, to me in my eyes. They're really good. They're just way better animal companions. And Summoner has that going for them, but also the fact that they have an amazing spell list. So the spell list is pretty like debuff and utility and buff based with a little offensiveness, but it's pretty good. And they also get unique things that other classes don't at earlier levels. It's a very strong class. Some very, very solid archetypes. I feel pretty confident actually just putting it like probably on the higher end of B tier here. Summoner is probably one of the only 6th level casters that I think can make an argument slipping into A. It's just very strong. It has a lot going on for it. Great action economy because your Eidolon could be like the brawler on the level of the fighter, and you have a 6th level caster with spells that generally other casters would kill to have as early on. It's pretty good. You can also build them to be solid frontliners too if you want to as well. While having an Eidolon, there's nothing wrong with that. Or make the Eidolon into a trap maker. There's a lot of things you can do with this class. Very strong. Swashbuckler. Okay, so Swashbuckler's pretty awkward. It's got some stuff going pretty well for it, but it's got some interesting archetypes that I kind of feel like I should really read more into. There's definitely a couple that are worth just kind of doing quick dips into, but there's definitely a couple of newer ones I have to look at for sure. I feel like this class kind of caps out early on though. It gets its improved critical like at 5, which is pretty cool. Panache is pretty neat. It gets its level added as precision damage to like when it uses like a rapier or whatever, the right kind of slashing weapon essentially. Pretty strong, but falls off pretty hard in precision based fights. Has a decent skill list. Saves aren't great. Full base attack. So I mean, it's got some stuff going on for it, but it doesn't really have any great answers to things, and it has a lot of stuff that can kind of mess up. Well, not a lot, but there's stuff that can mess with it in terms of the sheer one thing that it does very well can be messed with. Panache points are neat too, but you only have so many. You can't use them all, and you can't spam like crap out of riposte because it's an immediate reaction. But you can like parry a lot of these, so it's pretty good. I don't know exactly where I'd put this, but I would definitely throw it into E tier. Probably like here-ish, I would say. I maybe even slip it below Ninja, to be honest. It's a good class, but I don't think it does enough to make me super excited about it. And I don't think it has enough answers. Like it can do skills and it hits kind of hard and it has decent AC, but like these guys all do that and better. I mean, Fighter doesn't have the same thing on skills, but it just has a lot of ways to do combat differently. Well, actually, I'd probably lower it like this, but there's archetypes for Fighter that would make me very easily throw it into D tier. Potentially, there's builds and things that actually would make me throw it into the top of D tier, to be honest. Yeah, I feel pretty confident on that. Ranger, you could honestly because it has spells. Like I feel like you could probably put it up a little higher. I think you could actually make an argument for being low D, but I think it's. I really undervalue the spells, and I think on this class is the issue. Because like it does have like the ability to cure and do a bunch of other things that these other classes can't do, but only ever so slightly. I'm gonna begrudgingly give it because it kind of has spells and a few more things that these other classes can't do. But honestly, I think Slayer is definitely a lot more newbie friendly. This just works better because it can potentially side heal and has some other little spell answers in an animal companion, which I think actually do bring a little bit more value. So I'm actually going to bump Ranger up thinking about it now. See, I told you I'd second guess myself. Okay. Next class. Alright, Unchained Barbarian. Honestly, I don't think this thing does anything different than the other Barbarian does. You could basically just put these two together. It simplifies it and makes it easier to play for newer people, so I mean, I don't know, put it up higher, I guess, slightly, because it's just flat bonuses. Unchained Monk. Okay, Unchained Monk is actually fucking good. I'm going to straight up just say it. It's a huge improvement on the class. It does a lot of really good things. Gives them like a lot more to the class, bonus feats, new abilities, things to swap out. I think it's really good. I think you can make a solid case for it being in D tier. Lower end, but I think it's still up there. Probably better than Ranger, to be honest. Unchained Rogue. Okay, Unchained Rogue is actually really good too. I actually think that this shit is really good. I actually think that Unchained Rogue is like around Monk level, probably. I think you could probably swap either of these around. However, Rogue also has a crazy good archetype breaker that you could easily throw you into C, maybe even B tier. Probably C though. Unchained Summoner, kind of awkward. It's actually just a nerf the Summoner. I'd probably just throw it here. It's definitely higher than I think the rest of these guys, but it basically just fixes their spell list up, basically. So nothing wrong with that, but it just fixes it nerfs their spells, so you have to break them down. So you can put it here or maybe at the end of B, but it's definitely worse. So I feel happy putting it in C. Vampire Hunter. Okay, honestly, this thing is kind of weird. I don't know. It's kind of a flavor class thing. It does have 4th level spells and a couple other things, but it's once again a very specific class against vampires. It functions without having vampires, but it's not great. I mean, if you want to be like a super big edgelord, sure, but this thing has 4th level spells, and I'm really humoring the idea of putting it like at the low end of E tier, and that says a lot in itself. I don't know, honestly. Like, I've never actually seen this thing played, but when I like go over it and I've looked at it like several times, I don't think it does anything particularly well. Like, maybe here? It's just not great. It's an interesting class, and if you want to be like the super edgelord, yeah, it's not. It's there for you. Okay. Vigilante. Okay, so Vigilante is a weird class because the core class I would handily probably put at low D or high E, but it has a lot of archetype breakers. Like a lot of them, because it's basically made to imitate superheroes, so it has a lot of ways in the 6th level spells. So if we're just breaking like the base class, I'd probably put it like here or maybe here. However, a lot of the archetypes will probably make their way into C tier. So I'm gonna put it like here ish. Could be around here, but I'm gonna leave it here. But honestly, it has a lot of archetypes to push it into the C tier, 100%. It may be even some that might slip into B, but probably more like C because I don't really think the other archetypes are super crazy. But yeah, War Priest. Okay, War Priest is pretty nuts. It kills real hard, heals real good. It has a great way to throw buffs and spells in the field. Has some cool domains. Just doesn't do skills very well. It can enhance itself. I think it's pretty good. Do I think that this thing is better than Unchained Summoner? Probably not. I definitely don't think it's better than Umdara at the moment. I think these things are close though. Like they're within striking distance between these, like this setup here. It's definitely like here or yeah, or you move the other one up. But yeah, we're gonna put War Priest here. I do think that it's just better in terms of just straight up being like it's basically just a cleric fighter, which is pretty good. It has 6th level spells, and it can quick cast like spells as well, and it can channel and a bunch of other things. It does a lot of cool things for the party. It can heal, can murder things really well. It can be a decent spellcaster. Yeah, it's pretty solid. I mean, technically Inquisitor can kind of do that too, but I think just War Priest kind of does that a lot better. The Inquisitor does have some good skills, but the base class just is very underwhelming in my eyes, comparatively. Technically, yeah, you could probably make an argument to swap these two, actually, when I kind of think about it, because the Inquisitor just does skills better, but War Priest kind of just kills things better, and has quick casting spells, which is kind of nuts, so I'm going to leave that. I do think Inquisitor with the right archetype, though, can very much squeeze into B. Or at the very least high C, but I think there's an argument for some B tier shit in there too. So I think just the base class just doesn't really quite make it up here. Witch is great. I'd say my biggest issue with Witch is that it has a really good spell list, but well, it has spell list and hexes, which is great. but it has a real prominent spell list with certain things. It doesn't really deal with undead or constructs particularly well, or swarms or oozes, things that it can't like debuff and mind control. It has huge problems with, and its list just doesn't supplement that very well. However, Hex is given a lot of good stuff early on. I just think that this thing falls off a little bit late game. It's still really good. I think that you can make a case for it probably being low S or high or around top of the A around with Shaman. I don't know. Maybe Shaman and the Witch should probably swap, maybe. But I think Witch's spell list is a little bit better, though Shaman can potentially, with the build, get more spells, so it's kind of a tough one. I mean, Wizard's the king of like a ton of shit. It's pretty great. I honestly, these three are kind of like tied for me, but I'm gonna throw Wizard here because I think it's only. I think this one's actually probably a little bit better than these two because it just has the super spell list, but it's pretty fucking close. I think this is pretty good. I think yeah, I don't really have any complaints about any of the stuff really on the top. I think my only thing is I could maybe swap Witch and Shaman around, but they're both pretty close. Pretty close. I mean, you know what? I'm gonna put Witch down here, and I think you could swap either of these two around. I think Witch just falls off a little bit and has some problems on their spell list that make it very awkward, and Shaman kind of has a lot of the similar issues, but they can kind of get around it a little bit. Maybe, yeah. Let's swap that around. Okay, and then I'm pretty happy with this. This is fine. You could maybe make an argument for moving some of this stuff up. Inquisitor could maybe go up depending on the archetype that it's playing. Bloodridger could maybe go down, but I think it's fine the way it is. Paladin's fine. I think this is mostly fine. I think Brawler could potentially go a little bit higher depending on what you do with it. Same with Fighter. I think Fighter can very easily hit into high D tier if you have the right build and setup for it. Vigilante could possibly go up. Rogue can also potentially go up as well because it has some pretty good ones. But no, I think I'm actually pretty happy with most of the rest of this other list. I mean, Vampire Hunter can maybe go lower. Honestly, I'm not even really sure. But this is essentially my tier list for Pathfinder. There might be some stuff on here that I'd swap on a given day or if I thought about it a little bit more, but I think this is mostly pretty fair. And there's definitely builds and outliers that can make it go higher. If you guys want me to do another tier list, so like maybe I could do an archetype tier list, because like I could do a tier list on like, let's say, I don't know, like Warp or Inquisitor. Inquisitor would actually be a really good one. It has a lot of tier or archetypes that can kind of make it go higher or lower. Some of them can make it go like a fair bit higher. So if you guys want to see something like that, just let me know in the comments or whatever. If you want to see a tier list on archetypes for a specific class or my thoughts on them. This is kind of just a quick overview of a tier list that I kind of thought about doing. I think I'm fairly happy with how this turned out. There's probably a couple of things that I'll look at later and I'll be like, well, fuck. But I think this is solid. So yeah, just throw me in the comments if you guys want to see anything else done for archetypes or whatever, or my thoughts maybe expanded on why I made these choices. Just let me know. And, toss me a like and subscribe if you like the video and you want to see some other stuff. Definitely some other tier lists and some other builds. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you around later. Bye.